All right, guys, week 10 is in the books, and that's why we love the NFL so much. There's so much parity in this league. I was talking to some family members, and if you had put a parlay down on Moneyline Commanders, Packers, and Vikings, you would be a very, very rich man right now. So I did not put money down on that. I did not bet on that. I am not a rich man. I'm still going to be here breaking down all the fantasy games, all the fantasy relevance from this past weekend. We have a ton of stuff to get into, a ton of headlines to cover, and obviously going to keep grinding to hopefully win our money from our fantasy leagues and a chip here in a very few short weeks. This is a home stretch, so make sure you hit that like button on the video, subscribe as we get into kind of the dog days of the fantasy season, and I'll cue the intro and see you on the other side. Welcome back into TwinTakes Fantasy Football, and it is officially hoodie and sweats season. I will probably be doing most of these videos in a hoodie from now on. I know for most of this country, it's already been pretty cold, but I live in the South, so we are just finally catching up. But I must say, I really do enjoy the colder weather, but not as much as I enjoyed some of the absolute insanity that went down in the NFL this past week. Some unfortunate injuries, some wild games, potentially the game of the year in Vikings and Bills, and then just, again, a ton of fantasy impacts that we have to really break down and get through. So with that being said, let's stop wasting any time. Let's get into that first headline, which is going to be that game of the year in Vikings versus Bills. And just something I want to highlight, I mean, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, two of the top three wide receivers. We can throw Tyreek Hill in there as well. But, I mean, you thought you saw Stephon Diggs with that insane one-handed grab. You're like, wow, that is a catch of the season, only to be upstaged by Justin Jefferson, 5 minutes later, pulling down on that 4th and 18 one-handed grab. The ball is fully secured in Micah Hyde's hands, Justin Jefferson goes out with one hand, pulls it in, completes that catch. That was just unreal. And the way he held on to it, I mean, I kind of feel very confident. I didn't get a lot of predictions right in my preseason rankings, but my prediction that Justin Jefferson is the number one wide receiver in the NFL, that one's looking pretty strong, especially after that game. Again, some of the conversations around who's go one-on-one in a dynasty startup right now, Justin Jefferson is making a very, very strong argument that he should be the undisputed one-on-one, and I'm not going to argue that whatsoever. But another thing I want to mention from this game, I mean, everyone's talking about how crazy that last section of the game was. Guys, if you listened last week, I told you, expect fumbles from Josh Allen, expect those longer throws to be intercepted and be off course. That UCL injury and the impact that it's going to have when you have an inflammation in the elbow from a strained UCL ligament is going to put pressure on the nerve. It's going to impact the grip strength you have on the ball, especially in the last three fingers of your hands, which is why fumbles are going to be more likely, and he's going to have a bit harder time controlling the ball, especially down the field, which, again, is why he had a hard time holding onto the ball on the last second drive, which led to that fumble recovery for a touchdown, sent it to overtime from the Vikings before they kicked the field goal. And obviously when he tried to get push the ball down the field and had that game-ending, and Patrick Peterson had that game-ending interception, probably was struggling with ball control, especially because with a particular UCL injury, the longer you go on, like, it doesn't hurt and it's not really impactful in the first 15, 20 minutes of activity, but the longer that activity goes on, once you get into hour 2, hour 3, then it really starts to compound and gets worse as time progresses, as you go through that motion over and over and over and over again. So I'm not saying I predicted this, but I can certainly understand why it was not as, for me, it was not as shocking as the sequence of events that played out towards the end of the game as it was towards some of the people in the fantasy community. And again, I'm glad that something we talked about I'm not glad they came to relevance, but it's, again, the analysis that we provide here that helps you take advantage of fantasy games, and something you should be aware of if that UCL injury continues to persist for Josh Allen, that turnovers, especially later on in the games, are going to be more and more impactful. So moving on to our second headline, which is Justin Fields' historic rise. Again, this is bordering on the likes now of Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, guys like that. This is his, second almost 40-point game in a row. But prior to that, he had a 26-point game and a 28-point game. He's for real. It's not a one-off game or a aberration of a game that he had against a bad defense. No, Justin Fields continues to put this up against decent defenses and continues to find ways to exploit defense, and his athleticism is just crazy. Go back and watching the highlights of that game versus Detroit. Yeah, Detroit's not the strongest defense, but he's breaking tackles left and right, escaping out of the pocket. He looked like he had a sack in terms of sack. A play where he looked like he was about to get sacked twice into a 61-yard rush for a touchdown. I mean, the things that he's doing with his legs is unreal, and that translates so well to his passing game because now the defense has to respect him as a runner. They have to put a spy on him out of the back pocket. They have to rush more than just a 4-man rush every time, and it's opening up passing lanes for Darnell Mooney, for Cole Kmet, and making a lot of these fantasy receivers, these pass catchers really, really relevant. So I'm very excited for Justin Fields' prospects the rest of the way forward as a confidence booster in Justin Fields on my redraft team, in my legacy redraft team, in my main league. I drafted Lamar Jackson. I picked up Justin Fields early when I recommended him after week 5. And have held him through his dynamic rise. Started him last week, was very happy, won my matchup, and I'm starting him this week. Lamar Jackson plays Carolina. He'll be on my bench in favor of Justin Fields. That's how much confidence I have in Fields going forward. Number 3, is Jeff Saturday a good coach? No, he's not. This is just a super clickbaity title. It's interesting to see what happens to the Indianapolis Colts when they actually are led by a competent quarterback. I don't think the move to Sam Ehlinger was anything, was a good decision by any of the management levels, whether it's Irsay all the way down to Frank Reich, who's no longer with the Colts. Did Jeff Saturday help the O-line? Maybe. I don't know if I would go that far. I just think it was again, sometimes you bring in a new coach, you bring in a change of culture, and things immediately go up. We see this quite often with interim coaches where the first game tends to have a better performance. Also, I think it's more of a track record or a indictment on what the Raiders are doing. And if you listen to some of those post-game press conferences, whether it's Derek Carr, whether it's Devontae Adams, you see a lot of those guys are just not committed to the team. The motivation is rock bottom. It's probably like 50 feet below rock bottom. The guys just don't have fun. There are moments in there, and I'll talk about this later with in our waiver wire section, where players are running and the DBs for the Raiders, they just don't even bother tackling them. They gave Paris Johnson just a little hug, Paris Campbell. They just gave him a little hug and then let him walk into the end zone. Like, it's just ridiculous how lack of an effort that the Raiders are showing throughout this game. So Jeff Saturday, I want to highlight PFF. They made a really good point that why Jeff Saturday was a good hire, because he just has a really good relationship with Jim Irsay, and basically he was a guy that Jim Irsay could come in and not worry about Jeff Saturday wanting to keep the job, having to worry about him not getting his feeling hurt when he moves on to a different coach next year. He's just a placeholder. While Jim Irsay could start his coaching search early. And from that standpoint, I totally understand it. And actually, I'm understanding this move more and more when you kind of bring that business aspect into it. So we're going to ride it out. Matt Ryan obviously is going to be a huge boon to that team. But again, my outlook on them is not insanely high just because they were playing the worst team in the league, in my opinion, right now, which is the Raiders. It's not the Texans. Texans are scrappy. They make you work for it. They actually drag teams down to their level. Raiders just don't give a... Censored myself. They don't give it... they don't care anymore. So next topic. Gosh, I'm trying not to swear on this thing. That's the Northeast in me. Green Bay, are they back on track? I'm going to need to see a lot more. One game does not right the entire ship up there at Lambeau, but they looked really, really good against a stout Cowboys defense. Christian Watson, we got to talk about him because he comes out and has an amazing game. And I don't want to say that I'm anointing him as the next superstar wide receiver after one game, but we've seen this before. And a similar wide receiver in that division, Justin Jefferson, had a very slow start to his rookie season. Week 8 comes out, puts up 3 touchdowns, goes off, and then is just on historic track ever since. This could be the breakout game that could vault Christian Watson into the relevance he needs. He looks like he has his confidence back. I love seeing guys who enjoy the game. I love when he got his 3rd touchdown. He goes to the end zone and goes 1, 2, 3. I mean, I love seeing that stuff. It gives me confidence. The player is confident in themselves, and he's catching balls now. And I think it's going to lead to a better relationship with Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, getting back on track with the run game was crucial. Aaron Jones absolutely eviscerating that Dallas defense, going off for 24 fantasy points, was really, really good to see. So again, I don't think they're all the way back. I liked what I saw from them. There are positives to take away from that game. There's still some issues. Christian Watson still had some dropped passes. He only did his production on 4 targets. On 4 receptions. If it was more of like 9 receptions, I could see how that would translate. But again, we talk about these blow-up games where Jahan Dotson had his big Week 1 game on 3 receptions. Gabe Davis had his 30-point game on 3 receptions. These small reception games that turn into big points aren't translatable to consistent fantasy production. So that's why I'm not as high on Christian Watson as some of my fantasy cohorts may be. But again, I like what I saw. I'm going to keep monitoring on Green Bay, but I'm not going to go all in just yet. But it's a good start to get back on track. The next fantasy headline I want to talk about is the Cooper Kupp injury. This is obviously devastating. We just got a report earlier today that he's going in for surgery and should be out for 4 to 6 weeks. Guys, fantasy season is going to be wrapping up in 4 weeks for the majority of fantasy leagues. Week 14 is when the regular season ends, and playoffs are 15, 16, and 17. This basically means at best case scenario, you get him back for week 1 of the playoffs. Worst case scenario, he might slot in. Worst case scenario, he misses the rest of the season, and I could see them holding him out for the entirety of the season just because of how bad the Rams have looked in total. So for how good Cooper Kupp has been, especially on a really bad Rams offense, how consistent he's been, how much he commands a target share of that offense, this is devastating for fantasy managers who are holding on to Cooper Kupp. And basically, I wouldn't drop him at this point because there's still that slight hope that he comes back, and maybe he does play because he's just that competitive athlete, but he's basically lost all fantasy relevance for the rest of the 2022 season, and you need to pivot elsewhere. Last thing I want to mention here, last headline, there are no more perfect teams in the NFL. The Eagles' run has come to an end after the Commanders upset them last night. I'm not going to take anything away from the Eagles. It was a really weird game. Jordan Davis, obviously, they're missing him quite a bit in the center. They're giving up the highest EPA per play to the running backs with him out of the lineup. So they desperately are missing Jordan Davis as their run blocker in the middle. A couple bad calls, that missed face mask on Dallas Goedert, that really BS penalty against Brandon Graham at the end there. I'm not going to say that this was the Eagles falling apart. I just think they had like 14 or 15 bad breaks. The injury to Dallas Goedert, the injury to A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith was shaken up as well. It was a rough game all around for them, a very chippy game, which you expect with the NFC East. But again, we didn't expect them to stay perfect the entire season. Everyone has their ups and downs. It's a long season. No one's going to be healthy the entirety of the way. The Eagles had... Up until that point, they had 17 guys start every single game for them, which was the most in the NFL, which obviously health transitions to wealth in the NFL. Unfortunately, they finally got bit by the injury bug, and obviously we've seen a little bit of regression. But again, I still think they're legitimate title contenders and going to be legitimate fantasy assets down the stretch here as we make your run for the playoffs. So that's the headlines. Let's get into our studs, and we'll start off with Christian Watson, 30.7 points. Incredible 3 touchdowns on 4 receptions. Again, really exploiting the deep bomb from Aaron Rodgers, gaining some of that trust. Will be interesting to see how he is going forward. We talked about how I don't think that big games on less than 5 receptions are really translatable to consistent production. But again, we do know how Aaron Rodgers loves to take his deep shots, how he likes to push the field, how he likes those big plays. Christian Watson has now established himself as the firm number 1 deep threat option. He is insanely athletic. So I'm not expecting his blow-up games, but he can probably expect a deep touchdown or a deep pass, at least a target once or twice a game, which should sustain fantasy production as a good, solid wide receiver 3 flex option going forward with the opportunity to, blow up on weeks like this. Number 2, Justin Fields, 39.4 points. Absolutely ridiculous performance from him. 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, especially in a losing effort to the Detroit Lions. The kid is just good. He's playing with such confidence. His throws, I like the way he's throwing the football. I know that's a hot take right now, but I like the way he's slinging the rock. I like what he's done and improved in his passing game, and I think it really complements his running game really, really well. He's going to be a fantasy winner for a lot of people. And trading for him, probably not going to happen after this week, but again, as trade deadlines comes up, if you can steal him away from a guy who already has like a Josh Allen or, already has a Lamar Jackson, see what you can do, because when you have that wealth at quarterback, maybe they'll be willing to give that up for a discounted price. Number 3, Justin Jefferson, just got to highlight this. I mean, a beast from the fantasy perspective, but a beast in the NFL as well. anyone who says he's not the best wide receiver in the NFL right now is just out of their mind. I know there's a conversation around Tyreek Hill right now, the production he's putting up, but I think you put Justin Jefferson in that offense, he probably puts up the same amount of yardage from just a pure talent perspective, and with the youth on his side, how well he is, with how young he is. In my mind, Justin Jefferson is the clear number one wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, just the catches he makes is ridiculous. He had 9 receptions on targets, or from Amazon, next gen stats. He had 9 catches on passes that had a less than 50% catch rate. That's just ridiculous and unheard of. The dude is just special, and the Vikings just really got themselves a great guy, and just, makes you laugh at the Eagles for taking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. Number 4, CeeDee Lamb, 32.5 points. Finally, it's really nice to see him step up and take the wide receiver 1, be an alpha in that offense. This is his best fantasy performance in history, going back in his 3 years in the league. With Dak back, CeeDee Lamb looks a lot better, so very happy to have Dak back with him, hyper-targeting him almost to Cooper Kupp-esque levels, and he absolutely eviscerated this Green Bay defense, especially. We thought, me personally, I was kind of downgrading him with the coverage Jair Alexander was going to provide, especially with how good Jair has been in the past 3 weeks. But CeeDee Lamb, this was a step that we kind of hoped that they're looking at him to take earlier this year, maybe later on last year. So, very happy to see CeeDee Lamb step up in that offense, and I think he'll be, a very great fantasy asset going forward. And last but not least, you got to talk about Christian Kirk, 27 fantasy points in a losing effort to the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, this is just a product of the fact that they just don't have any really offensive weapons. They got rid of James Robinson, Laviska Shenault, and one other guy that I'm missing at this point from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I do think, personally, that the Jags go out and get another receiver. They already got Calvin Ridley at the trade deadline. I think it would be prudent of them to go out and probably spend a high pick on Quentin Johnson, who in my opinion is the number 1 wide receiver prospect in this upcoming draft. Just really surrounding, we see how well offensive weapons and wide receivers translate to NFL success with the trade of A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, that sort of stuff. So I think it would be really prudent to go ahead and surround Trevor Lawrence with those wide receivers. Calvin Ridley isn't a bona fide option. I think the fact that he's been essentially out of the league for 2 years, he's a bit older. He'll be 29 when he joins the team next year. Getting Quentin Johnson would be very, very beneficial for this team, especially as that defense continues to improve under Josh Allen, Devin Lloyd, and their first round pick, who's kind of escaping me at this moment. Sorry, I don't have a photographic memory. But yeah, great for Christian Kirk. He'll be absolutely insane for the rest. That whole tirade is to say, great for Christian Kirk. He'll be absolutely great for the rest of this season. But again, I don't know how, if you're in Dynasty, I don't know how long his long-term prospects will be as they add more weapons to that offense for Trevor Lawrence. All right, now we get to our honorable mention section. Dalvin Cook, 22.1 points, really saved by the 81-yard touchdown rush. I think that was like 17 points in and of itself. So he's having a pretty poor game up until that point, but that's what Dalvin provides, that explosivity. He's just so fast with the ball, and this is why he was a first-round pick. Stephon Diggs, 18.8 points, and he did it without even finding the end zone. Normally he does find the end zone, but he's just so good. He got, I believe, 11 or 12 receptions, had that insane one-handed grab. I can't think of a better win-win trade than the Vikings trading Stephon Diggs for that first-round pick. Bills get Stephon, who obviously has an amazing relationship with Josh Allen. Vikings get Justin Jefferson. This is the biggest win-win of all time. It's one of the best trades of all time. I can't say it. Josh Jacobs, we knew he's going to absolutely eviscerate the Colts on the ground. Their defense is not that good, especially with Hunter Renfrow going to IR and Darren Waller going to IR. Their Raiders options are limited, and even with how bad that team is performing, Josh Jacobs is a crucial aspect to that offense. 19.6 points. Deonta Foreman really got it done on Thursday night against the Atlanta Falcons. Not even close to his 31-point performance that he had 2 weeks ago, but again, it was a game that basically they were playing in a hurricane, and you're going to attack on the ground. Deontay Foreman, despite the addition of Chuba Hubbard, still looks really good and could be the number 1 running back option in that offense going forward. Aaron Jones, again, we talked about how well he was doing it, again, on the ground against the Cowboys defense, really finding holes, exploiting it in the pass game and in the run game, over 100 yards on the ground. I think for the Packers to sustain fantasy success, Aaron Jones has to be a crucial part of that offense going forward. They need to get him involved early and often to open up passing lanes for guys like Christian Washington and Romeo Doubs, especially with their lack of experience being rookies. A former teammate of Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, again, same vein as Josh Jacobs, just absolutely, there's only one true pass catching option in Las Vegas, and that's going to be Devontae Adams. He is a top wide receiver, and he will just absolutely get his no matter how bad that team performs. Kadarius Toney, 17.0 points. Just want to highlight him with the injuries to Juju, with the injuries to Mecole Hardman. I think Kadarius Toney is going to be the wide receiver 1 in that offense going forward. Obviously, he slots in behind Travis Kelce in a pass catching option, but any of those guys who took a flyer on Toney after his trade from the Giants, I think he should be a very, very good fantasy start going forward. And I think as Kansas City tries to, account for the lack of a Tyreek Hill there and move forward and try to rebuild their wide receiver core, Kadarius Toney could be a very, very crucial and focal point of that offense going forward. Saquon Barkley, 35 touches. A little bit concerned about how much he's getting involved in this offense. I don't know if that's production is sustainable, being given 35 touches every single game, but he's so crucial to what the Giants are doing, and they continue to be a 7-2 team, so they're going to make the playoffs, and it obviously works for Brian Dable. But 22.5 points, again, if you had to redraft, at this point in the season, Saquon Barkley is the undisputed 101 pick. He's just that good. Jeff Wilson Jr. We thought that he was left for the Fantasy Reaper after trading for the 49ers traded for CMC, but then they traded Jeff Wilson back to his former offensive coordinator in Miami with Mike McDaniels, and he's just absolutely killing it there. He has outsnapped Raheem Mostert since arriving in Miami, 34 snaps to 23 snaps. So Jeff Wilson looks like he's going to be the go-forward guy, especially from the pass-catching perspective, which is where we get a lot of our points in our PPR leagues. So Jeff Wilson Jr., if someone happened to drop him and you got lucky picking him up, good on you, because he looks very, very good. Tony Pollard, nothing much you can say other than the Green Bay is the 30th ranked run defense in the league. They are very... Zeke out, they rely heavily on the run game. Tony Pollard, in my opinion, is a better running back than Zeke, has more explosiveness, more burst. Only person that can't see it in this world is Jerry Jones, but as long as Zeke is out, Tony Pollard is a top 5 fantasy back. Cole Kmet, obviously a product of the Justin Fields explosion, with having to put more linebackers in that spy position, have the weak side linebacker being tailing and having to press up in the pocket. Obviously opens up the passing lanes for Darnell Mooney for Cole Kmet, and he found the end zone twice for 21.4 fantasy points and the number 1 overall tight end performance in the week. Patrick Mahomes, 31.1 points. Again, he's just really good at football. In my mind, he's the best quarterback in the NFL, bar none. I don't hear any excuses. There's not even a question. Not Josh Allen, not Justin Herbert, not Joe Burrow, not Jalen Hurts, not Tom Brady, not Aaron Rodgers. If I had to pick one guy right now, Patrick Mahomes is just so much better than any other quarterback that is playing this game in recent memory. Jonathan Taylor, again, we talked about that bump of getting that interim head coach to the Colts. Finally got back. Looks like he's healthy again, which is obviously crucial to him performing well. Really also helped by playing a abysmal Raiders defense. So again, Jonathan Taylor, 23.3 points, looks to be at least a little bit more refreshing than what we saw from the past 8 or so weeks after his week 1 performance. James Conner back in the Colts offense. Back in the not the Colts, but the Cardinals offense with Kyler Murray's hamstring. Obviously, Colt McCoy took over. He's a good game manager, but is definitely less of a passing threat than Kyler Murray. So it makes sense why why Cliff Kingsbury relied on the running game more, and James Conner put up a very, very good fantasy game. With the release of Eno Benjamin, expect James Conner to be a bona fide start going forward. I do want to highlight 2 last guys here. Jalen Hurts, 22.1 points, even in that abysmal performance. He's just so good for fantasy with his rushing upside, rushing touchdowns and picking up yards with his feet, that even in a really, really bad loss where he threw an interception where they only put up 22 or 21 points, that he's still going to get you 22.1 points and be a top 5 fantasy QB in the week. He's just so good for fantasy from that aspect. And finally, Terry McLaurin, a guy that's had some issues with consistency with him being a pretty mediocre offense. I just want to highlight how good he played against the Philadelphia Eagles in that stout secondary. He only got 16.8 points, but again, he was just so good that I can't not highlight the absolute monster that he was against that secondary. So that's going to wrap up our studs. Let's get into our duds. This is going to be a little bit more devastating as we talk about a couple guys that are injured here. First, we talk about Jerry Jeudy. exits the game after 1 target, 0 receptions for 0 points. Brutal injury for Jerry Jeudy. He hasn't been able to stay on the field any of his 3 seasons here in Denver. It's really disappointing for a guy that was highly touted coming out of Alabama. Looks like his fantasy season is over at this point. So much high hopes and expectations for this Denver offense, especially for a guy that was drafted in the 5th or 4th round, depending on how deep your league is with Jerry Jeudy, and looks like he's going to return very, very bad value on that. Next, Cooper Kupp, 1.4 points. He leaves. We talked about his injury earlier. High ankle sprain, heading into surgery. His fantasy season is essentially over at this point. Very devastating for Cooper Kupp managers. David Montgomery, this is just something I want to highlight here that, despite the offensive explosion and the offensive renaissance that the Bears have experienced over the past few weeks, it hasn't been really involved in the running game. Neither Khalil Herbert nor David Montgomery are getting involved, as they are designing a lot of runs for Justin Fields and having him torch defenses on the ground. Honestly, their best running back, their most explosive runner, is in order. It's going to be Justin Fields first, Khalil Herbert second, and David Montgomery's third. So David Montgomery is the third rushing option on that offense right now, just from a pure eye test perspective. I know there's people that will disagree with me on that, but even as this offense continues to improve, I don't know how much David Montgomery is going to be involved apart from just a first and second down back. He's not getting the goal line work. He might not be relevant for fantasy going down the stretch. Cordell Patterson, 2.5 points. This is a game that I'm going to throw out just because, again, playing in a hurricane, I don't know how much I want to take stock in that. Cordell Patterson, we saw how good he was last weekend, putting up 2 touchdowns, getting well over 20 fantasy points. He has an insane matchup coming up this week as well. So, I'm throwing this game out. I'm not going to worry about it too much. Just you got to roll in the flames with Cordell Patterson and just take your lumps. Everyone has a down weeks every now and then. Number 5, George Kittle. I'm just going to highlight this here, only at 2.6 fantasy points. And this is just a frustrating thing because, they traded for CMC. Elijah Mitchell is now back in the fold. You have Deebo Samuel. You have Brandon Ayuk. There's just way too many mouths to feed. And this is a very similar issue with what we see with the Eagles, where they're such a dynamic offense. They are a top 5 NFL team. The 49ers are going to make a very deep playoff push. I believe they are a borderline title contender. It's just there's so many dynamic dynamic offensive weapons that you can't feed every single weapon every single week for fantasy. George Kittle, especially being a tight end, is going to be used in blocking sets, especially as they have 3 guys that they can line up in the backfield between Deebo, CMC, and Elijah Mitchell. We know how Kyle Shanahan loves his run game. George Kittle, unfortunately, puts up a dud of a week, and I don't know how much I see this improving down the stretch given their game scripts and how they're going to be utilizing their weapons. Some honorable mentions. Kareem Hunt, 2.4 points. We've been trying to, highlight Kareem Hunt and say this is a bounce back week. We've had some gut feelings. I said he was a gut start against the Dolphins this week. This is a week for him to show it up. Yeah, it's time for him to drop. If he can't do it against some of these really good defenses, he's stuck behind Nick Chubb. I'm throwing him down. He's not startable at this point. And also the entire Browns offense was pretty bad. Amari Cooper, 4.7 points, just couldn't get anything going against this Dolphins defense. That supposedly, they gave up over 30 points to the Bears, and we'll see if this offense can improve with Deshaun Watson coming back. But if I'm anything off of the preseason, how he looked preseason, I think he's going to take some time. He'll be very, very rusty. He hasn't been in the building. He hasn't been in an NFL building for almost a year and a half now, dealing with a lot of real life stuff and outside stuff. So I don't know how much of a boon he'll be for this team. It seems like he might be a little bit too little too late to salvage the Brown season at this point. Kyle Pitts, 3.8 points. We've talked about how much might be the biggest fantasy bust in the season. 3rd round pick, absolutely lamenting his production in this offense. Just, he's not good. Wan'Dale Robinson, 2.5 points. We had him as a gut check start for this week. Unfortunately, it looks like Darius Slayton is going to be the wide receiver 1. That's the guy that Daniel Jones likes. Wan'Dale Robinson. Maybe it's his height, maybe it's his route running, maybe it's his inexperience as a rookie. We thought he was going to step up the wide receiver 1 option, but it looks like that's going to be Darius Slayton's role. Alvin Kamara, 6 points. Again, it might be age, might be the inefficiency of this offense. Trevor Penning is still out. This offensive line is not performing as well as they've had in years past, obviously impacting Alvin Kamara as they fall to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Juju Smith-Schuster, 4.3 points. He had a great run, but now he's injured. He should be out for at least 2 to 3 weeks. So that's unfortunate for guys for the Juju managers. Chris Olave, another game that it blows my mind. I still can't wrap my head. I've watched this game multiple times. I don't understand how this bottom 3 ranked pass defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Chris Olave has been so good and so dominant, and even with Andy Dalton throwing him the ball, he's been putting up these insane fantasy points. He's such a pure route runner. He only puts up 5.5 points. What the heck is going on in New Orleans? I think they basically just put the nail in the coffin for their playoff hopes, and this was very disappointing. I thought Chris Olave was going to be a top 15 wide receiver at least this week. DeAndre Swift, 7.7 points, found the end zone to save his fantasy day, but not involved in this offense at all. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if he's still injured. I don't know if Jamal Williams is just outperforming him. But DeAndre Swift, for a guy that a lot of people were very high on coming into this year, and after an amazing week 1, looks very concerning for his fantasy process for the rest of the year. Might be one of the biggest disappointments in fantasy this year. Deebo Samuel, kind of in the same vein as George Kittle, only 6.1 points. Again, we know that Elijah Mitchell and CMC had the bulk of touches. Again, when they have 2 dynamic running backs such as those 2 guys, it's very hard for Shanahan to want to put the ball in Jimmy Garoppolo's hand and trust him to throw the ball, especially with how turnover prone he is. So it's going to limit Deebo's upside and not going to really reach the same heights that he did last year. DJ Moore, 4.9 points. Again, same vein as Cordell Patterson, Kyle Pitts. It was a hurricane. I'm throwing it out. He's still very talented. I would still see if I can move for him before the trade deadline. Derrick Henry, 7.7 points. He's going up against one of the best defenses in Denver right now. So yeah, I'm not surprised that he was stymied a little bit. They were able to the Titans were able to attack the defense through the passing game, but this is, again, a tremendous run defense, and I'm not surprised that Derrick Henry had a little bit of a letdown game here. This does not say anything about Derrick Henry's production or how good he is. He's still a monster on the ground. It just says a lot to how good the Denver defense is. Zach Ertz, another devastating injury. He will be out for the rest of the season. You have to go down and find another option on the waiver wire, but this does improve prospects for Rondale Moore, for DeAndre Hopkins, and Marquise Brown when he comes back. Brandon Cooks, 6.2 points, another huge disappointment on fantasy. We thought he was one of those guys with those really safe floor, really high floors, just not really involved in this offense. Houston's basically forgettable from an offensive standpoint this week. Really only offensive piece that I can really find myself looking at in the Texans is Dameon Pierce. They run a lot of stuff through Dameon Pierce. He's getting over 25 touches a game, just not getting anything into Brandon Cooks' hand. He's obviously very frustrated given his series of tweets after the trade deadline. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 0 points. Drop him. They're moving forward, and he's not a part of their plans. Mike Evans, 7.9 points. It was a very weird game. It's over in Germany. Time difference, a lot of things going on. They managed to eke out the win. I'm very glad. We talked about this game earlier that if they wanted to remain competitive, we saw how good Tariq Woolen is. We saw how good the secondary is for the Seattle Seahawks. They would have to establish the ground game. They absolutely established the ground game with Rashad White. Thank God they're moving on from Lenny because he's not that good on the ground. So not surprised that the wide receivers here took a little bit of a dip as they went ahead and established the ground game and won that game. As we kind of said, that's in order to win this game, they would have to do that, and they couldn't rely on the passing game. It's always nice when you predict something and it comes true and it follows the game script that you kind of envision in your head. It makes you feel good about your predictions. A.J. Brown, 1.2 points, was shaken up in this game against the Commanders. We'll have to monitor his injury status, especially a very concerning injury for his knee. He has a little bit of an injury history, so not really involved after he took that hit and was on the sideline for a few plays. He came back in, but again, wasn't targeted after that. Or he was targeted, but very infrequently, especially after that interception that Hurts threw. So again, his injury is something to monitor, but again, it was a down game for the Eagles as a whole. Is an offense that has tons of passing options, but with Dallas Goedert's injury, A.J. Brown is someone that's going to be absolutely critical to the Eagles' success going forward. Wouldn't worry about it too much. Also, that same thing goes to Miles Sanders. Again, a down game for the Eagles as a whole. Miles Sanders, 5.4 points, but as they lose one of their key offensive weapons in tight end Dallas Goedert, Miles Sanders is by far the best running back. He has so much explosivity, so much burst, and he generally has a nose for the end zone. Didn't find it this week, but he's a guy that has to be in your lineup each and every week. So I'm not concerned with the fantasy production this week. So that's going to wrap up the duds. Now we get into our final and most critical section of these weekly recaps. And unlike last week, we have a lot to talk about this week. Waiver pickups. First, I'm not going to surprise you. There's some very obvious pickups this week. Number one is going to be Christian Watson after his 30.7 performance. He looks to have taken over as a wide receiver one in Green Bay. You obviously want that wide receiver one role that's tied to a back-to-back MVP in Aaron Rodgers. Again, I don't think this production is sustainable given how few receptions he actually put up that production on, and touchdowns are not a consistent stat. But again, if he is truly the wide receiver one going forward, he's going to be a guy that is going to win a lot of people, a lot of games, and a lot of championships. So if you have wide receiver waiver one, you need to be burning it on Christian Watson. Number two, Rachaad White. He is going on to bye, but you have to pick him up. He came into this game against the Seahawks as the starting running back. He came in running back one. He had over 100 yards. He has taken that role away from Leonard Fournette. He was way more explosive. He has way more burst. He put up a ton of points and didn't even find the end zone. So going forward, they have found their run game. Todd Bowles is, still figuring out this offensive line. But to win games, they're going to have to establish it, and Rachaad White will be the guy going forward. He has a very juicy fantasy playoff schedule. Pick him up. People will not be looking for him. Generally, the ESPN app does not highlight players to pick up if they are on bye week. So go down, search for Rachaad White, go to the very bottom. You will find him. Pick him up if you haven't already. This is like the fourth week in a row that we've highlighted Rachaad White as a must pick up. Paris Campbell. The thing is, I understand why people want to pick him up. He had a great game this past week, 17.4 fantasy points with Matt Ryan under center. In the 3 games that Matt Ryan has played with Paris Campbell, he has been a top 12 receiver in all 3 of those games. However, I don't think it's going to be a necessary pickup just because, again, his touchdown, this is what I was talking about earlier. If you remember back when we talked about the Colts, the DBs of the Raiders literally just, as he's running towards the end zone, they gave him a little hug, then gave him a little pat in the butt, and then ushered him right into the end zone. They just don't care. They just did not care. He should have been tackled. Literally 31 other teams would have tackled him. So I don't think his fantasy value was truly a representation of how good he is. But if you need a wide receiver start, his production with Matt Ryan says quite a bit about how good he is. Number 4, Darius Slayton. This is a fade Wandale. Darius Slayton stock up. Looks to be the wide receiver one in that offense. And as long as Daboll continues to be the coach there, you can't run it all through Saquon. Daniel Jones is actually an efficient game manager. Darius Slayton's the one that's found the end zone most for this Giants wide receiving core. Darius Slayton would be the guy to pick up in a pinch start going forward. Last but certainly not least, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. We've been waiting to see who is going to be that guy that stepped up in the passing game for the Titans. Was it going to be Treylon Burks? Was it going to be Robert Woods? Neither of them. Robert Woods has been basically irrelevant. Treylon Burks has been way too injured, and I don't know how relevant he's going to be even when he comes back. We now have Ryan Tannehill back in the fold, throwing him the ball. So with Malik Willis, the passing game was very, very limited. With Ryan Tannehill back, he definitely can get involved in the passing game. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine should be the wide receiver one for this team going forward, and you always want to draft those wide receiver ones. So I don't know if you'll have the same production. He had 27 fantasy points, or he had quite a bit of fantasy points given finding the end zone twice in this past week. Obviously not production that's sustainable, but if he's the wide receiver one in that offense, certainly not a bad option to roster, especially as we continue to deal with some bye weeks. So those will be my 5 crucial waiver pickups: in Christian Watson, Rachaad White, Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Obviously, in order of 1 to 5, how confident I feel about you picking them up. This has been a much longer episode, but just so much to talk about, and I anticipate these episodes being a little bit longer as we prepare for the fantasy playoffs. This is the most crucial time. 4 weeks to go. This is the final stretch, so let's get to it. Let's win some of you guys some fantasy championships, and I'll see you in a couple days previewing Week 11. Take care.